I met a traveler from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor will those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear: My name is Osmandius, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. Now that I read the poem in its original formatting, I'm going to read the poem again with a slight variation, and I'd like you guys to pay attention and see how you feel after it. I met a traveler from an ancient land who said, "Two huge legs without a body, made of stone, stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half buried, a broken face lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and cold expression conveyed the sculptor's emotions well. Somehow survived, infused into the lifeless statue, the sculptor's hand, which criticized his subject, and the subject's heart that fed on its own arrogance. And on the pedestal, these words appear: My name is Osmandius, King of Kings. Look at my power, all who are powerful, and despair." Nothing else remains. Around the decay of that colossal wreck, ultimate and bare, the lone and outstretched sands. I'm making my first appearance here, but now we'll get into the good part. So what I just read for you was me paraphrasing almost every line of Percy Shelley's Osmandius. So why does it feel less impactful than the original? Like, the meaning is more or less the same, but perhaps it's not about the subject of the story itself which makes a poem so memorable, but Shelley's poetic rendering of the story. The issue can be seen through modern reconstructions of Shakespeare's plays and modern English Bible translations. There is something lost through paraphrase, and this problem was highlighted by Clent Brooks in The Heresy of Paraphrase, a chapter in his book The Well-Wrought Urn. Brooke is cautious due to the strong danger of the dependence on paraphrasing. Poems of any artistic work are subjective. That is one of the greatest features, and the reason why so many people can have different experiences reading the same poem. Literary criticism is a tough field due to this subjectivity, and while slapping a label such as ambiguity can work, it does something much worse than just be inadequate. For Brooks, these labels are positively misleading in their implication that the poem constitutes a statement of some sort, that it is true or false, and expressed more or less clearly or eloquently or beautifully. This binary view in itself is contradictory to the essence of language. This is because, broken down, words themselves don't operate in a binary. As Brooke mentions in the text, good poetry isn't its content, but its form. Form not representing the formal devices like metaphor, rhyme, or structure, but rather the organic unity of the work, and content representing the paraphrasable elements or what a work is about. The form at its base is meaning, but it's a unique meaning. It's this unity that is a facet of language itself, because language is an unstable system. A good example of this is listening to a song. A song has a specific key, a specific BPM. It has structure ingrained within it, as does a poem. If a sudden key change occurs, it may sound dissonant and jarring to the listener, or if the BPM randomly changes, the song sounds sloppy. As Brooks said, for the imagery and the rhythm are not merely the instruments by which this fancied core of meaning, which can be expressed in a paraphrase, is directly rendered. Critics may identify the specific issues with a text or a song, but even listeners and readers can feel something intrinsically off. We judge a piece of art not by its parts, but by its sum. Each word, rhyme, metaphor is contextualized by the whole. Good literature, then, becomes invulnerable to paraphrase. By transmitting a work's supposed message with the full context it was designed to be in, it loses its unity and becomes an almost husk of a paraphrase. Brooks received a lot of negative criticism for what other critics called new criticism. The claims were that Brooks' criticism technique was too narrow in scope and excluded important context, such as when the poem was written, the political and social issues of the time, the author, and the author's other works. Brooks dismissed these critics by restating the idea of organic unity that is possessed within a work. This unity allowed the possibility of deriving historical and biographical context from the language within the poem. He argued that a poem does not depend on its success on outside knowledge that we bring to it. It is richly ambiguous, yet harmoniously orchestrated, coherent in its own special aesthetic terms. The biggest issue that Brooks solved was the focus shifting away from analysis of the actual text, in place for, as Heather Dubrow notes, the study of ethical values and philosophical issues through literature, the tracing of literary history, and political criticism. In order to achieve this, the new critics aimed to exclude the reader's response, the author's intention, historical and cultural context, and moralistic bias from their analysis. This move was spearheaded by Brooks' teacher, John Crowe Ransom, in his book, Criticism, Inc. Formalist critics, such as the new critics that Brooks was a part of, assumed that a work of literature is a freestanding, self-contained object whose meaning can be found in the complex network of relations between its parts, allusions, images, rhythm, sounds, etc. Perfect. Now that we know the methodology of the new criticism, let's analyze a poem in that fashion. Ozymandias is a sonnet metered in iambic pentameter. The rhyme scheme is unique, or at least unusual for a sonnet of this era. It doesn't fit in a conventional Petrarchan pattern, but instead interlinks with the first 8 lines, the octave, with the last 6 lines, the set. By gradually replacing old rhymes with new ones in the form shown, the sonnet is arguably Shelley's most famous poem, and it's especially unusual due to this poem contrasting so heavily with Shelley's greater body of work. The A rhyme in the first, third, and fifth line altogether already depict Ozymandias without even mentioning who or what he is. Land, sand, command. In this we can see the poem setting up that this figure is a powerful one who ruled and had command over the land. The ending rhyme on the 7th line is abrupt and is isolated from the rest of the rhyme to really capture the essence of the non-living statue, but more so the lack of legacy and life Ozymandias in the end had. This is in contrast to the 6th line and the 8th line that show the sculptor's passion, the sculptor whose creation lasted beyond the king's power. It's very interesting that the poem sets up the story as a conversation in a different setting from the rest of the poem, adding an additional distance between the speaker and the history of Ozymandias. This space adds to the mocking of Ozymandias that his remembrance is not only due to the passions of another, but furthermore, not even known by the speaker before meeting the traveler. The second setting is devoted to the desert scene. By setting the poem in a desert, the poem shows how powerful nature as a force really is. The poem itself contains great imagery. The lone and level sands stretch far away, visualizing a barren land that is devoid of life, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone, and especially a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command, picturing the ruins of a mighty leader whose power has clearly not held up through time, before even introducing the whole unique piece towards the end that clarifies who the statue is. We already understand the person he is. There's a clear, strong symbolism with the statue representing the hubris of Ozymandias and the befitting irony within the statue being broken, the toppling of regimes to the sands of time. This is especially true when looking at the setting around the statue. The great expanse of sand is deserted not only because it's a desert, but it represents the true lack of power humanity has when surrounded by the vastness and great power that is nature. The nature or sand eroded the statue over time and soon will obscure him completely. Everything he built, his power, crumbled to the power of time and nature, because these forces are insurmountable by man. All that remains is his arrogance and the passion of the sculptor. Shelley's word choice is phenomenal. Some good examples are found in the Antique Land, which mentally braces us to start thinking of ancient structures and frames this in antiquity, which carries the weight for the later reveal in the poem. describing the sculptor's emotions as passions that have survived, stamped on these lifeless things, befits the end metaphor perfectly, even before we reach the poetic climax, reading Osmandius' own words on a statue. And lastly, look on my works, ye mighty in despair. This is just such a good way of hammering home what Shelley was trying to express in the poem, the pure irony of the situation, how mighty kings fall. Look at the country that is no longer but a desert, where the only sign of remembrance is a broken, cracked statue of arrogance. So what we are left with is there's an arrogance that man will ever be able to control or dominate the destructive and indiscriminate power of time, history, and nature that Shelley highlights in this poem. While this poem can be read with a political lens, it seems to encapsulate more of a deeper affinity for artistry. I mean by this that it's significant that the statue was left, the statue that was created by a sculptor, a type of artist. The poem expressively implies the country King Osmandius ruled over is gone, and yet the art remains. We can attest to that ourselves by looking at classic literature. It demonstrates that art and language long outlast the other legacies of physical or political power.